Hello and welcome. My name is Tom Pesek. I'm a Senior Liaison Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization's Liaison Office for North America, based in Washington, D.C. And I have the pleasure of serving as moderator of our event this morning. On behalf of FAO North America and CARE, I would like to thank all of you for joining this virtual congressional briefing entitled She Feeds the World, Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition. Today's webinar briefing is part of an ongoing partnership between FAO North America and CARE. Before proceeding with our program, there are a few important housekeeping items I would like to cover. Firstly, I would like to advise you that this event is being recorded and it is also being live streamed on Twitter at FAO North America. Please join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #SheFeedsTheWorld and follow us at FAO North America and CARE. Feel free to let us know who you are and from where you're joining us in the Zoom chat box. And please use the Zoom Q&A box to ask your questions, stating your name and affiliation, if any, and to whom your question is directed. Due to time constraints, I will not be able to provide full and proper introductions for our very distinguished group of speakers, but their biographies will be posted in the Zoom chat box for ease of reference. Lastly, I would like to provide a brief outline of how our event will be structured. In a moment, I will give the floor to my FAO colleague, Vimlendra Sharan, to offer welcoming remarks. And thereafter, we will hear from Maureen Miruka, Director for Gender and Youth and Livelihoods at CARE, who will also offer welcoming remarks. We will then have the honor and good fortune of hearing from Senator John Boozman from the great state of Arkansas, as well as from Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan from the great state of Pennsylvania. Thereafter, we will hear co-keynote addresses from Susan Kaaria, Senior Gender Officer at FAO, and from Melissa Kaplan, Senior Policy Advocate for Food Security and Nutrition at CARE. We will then transition to the Q&A segment of our event, which will begin with brief remarks from Maura Barry, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. And we will endeavor to end the session promptly at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. I now have the pleasure of introducing Vimlendra Sharan, Director of FAO's Liaison Office for North America, based in Washington, D.C., to offer welcoming remarks. Vimlendra has served in his role as Director since December 2016, and he came to Washington from Rome, Italy, having served as permanent representative of India to the Rome-based Food and Agriculture Agencies of the United Nations. Vimlendra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us for the webinar today. My name is Vimlendra Sharan. I'm Director of the North America FAO office based out of Washington, D.C. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with FAO, we are the oldest UN organization, having been established way back in 1945 and mandated to work with governments and other stakeholders around the world for a world free from hunger and malnutrition, where food and agriculture contribute to improving the living standards of all, especially the poorest, including women and children, in an economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable manner. We have over 11,000 staff now working in nearly 130 countries in multiple projects, policies, and programs from farm to fork. And gender is a cross-cutting issue in all our work. Today, we are happy to partner with CARE USA in hosting the event with an aim to sensitize our audience, including the congressional staffers for whom this briefing is primarily meant, that we cannot achieve inclusive and sustainable food systems, eliminate hunger and malnutrition, or achieve sustainable development without women empowerment and gender equity. The online platform, a fallout of this pandemic, perhaps the only positive fallout of the pandemic, has also given us an opportunity to reach to a global audience much beyond the confines of North America. The event today will give us an opportunity to hear from experts as also from policymakers. We have, as Tom mentioned, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan and Senator John Boozman joining us today A very warm welcome to both of you and to all our esteemed speakers from FAO and KUSA and USAID. I'm sure your experience, expertise, and vision guiding your remarks will further help strengthen our resolve to make our voices heard in demanding and ensuring a rightful place for women in global agriculture, as in the whole society at large. I just want to share a couple of statistics with you. Globally, about 43% of the workers who are engaged in agricultural activities are women. And across the developing world, it goes up to nearly 60%. In US, as per the 2017 agriculture census, nearly 36% of the farmers are women. But even here, in one of the most advanced and developed countries of the world, you have only 29.13% of the farmers, women farmers, who are principal operators on their farm. So this number has grown from the 2012 census from 13.66% to 29.13% today. But we still have a long, long way to go to get this figure at a 50-50% or a parity level. Needless to say, women are a critical force in agriculture and food systems worldwide, but they are disproportionately affected by hunger and malnutrition. As producers, women have less access to resources, assets, and opportunities, and often encounter barriers to becoming members of rural organizations and policy institutions. As consumers, we all know that they are more likely to be food insecure than men. In many parts of the world, women always, and I mean always, eat the last and perhaps the least. So there is compelling evidence that food production and rural income increases when gender gaps in agriculture are reduced. FAO estimates that if women had access to the same productive resources as men, they could increase yield on their farms by nearly 20 to 30%. This in turn would reduce the number of hungry people in the world by 12 to 17%, and that's a humongous number. But what we really need to understand for this to happen, it is imperative that we move beyond just women's right and start focusing on women's empowerment. Increased power to make decisions in the household will require changing perhaps very deep-seated rules and norms governing gender relations. For me, achieving gender equity in agriculture is not about women. It is about men and women. It's about the balance of power between the two. It is about the distribution of mutual benefits between the two. If we focus only on women, I'm doubtful that we will really be able to empower them. We need to focus on this gender parity, on this gender equation. At FAO, we are all convinced that if and when this gender equation is balanced and women and men have a level playing field, global agriculture will be a much happier place and the world much more food secure. I'll stop here. This topic really agitates me and I can go on and on, but I just want to stop here and thank all of you again for joining and yield the floor back to our moderator to take the event forward. I really look forward to hearing from all our experts who are joining us today, as also from the policymakers, Senator Boozman and Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Vimlendra, for getting us started with those excellent welcoming remarks. I now have the great pleasure of introducing Maureen Miruka, the Director of Gender, Youth, and Livelihoods at CARE USA, who's currently based in Nairobi, to offer some remarks. Maureen previously served as team leader of CARE's flagship Women in Agriculture program, Pathways, and as principal research scientist at the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization. Maureen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to my colleague, the first speaker, for setting the background for the conversation this evening. I'll begin by giving you a brief background about CARE, which is an organization that was founded in 1945 when 22 American organizations came together to rush life-saving care packages to survivors of the World War II. CARE has since expanded its reach through the years to over 90 countries around the world to fight poverty and provide assistance in humanitarian emergencies. CARE is committed to gender equality, to gender justice, human rights, and women and girls empowerment. We like to single out women and girls empowerment because there is a huge gap, as we just heard, between men and women in the agriculture sector. Our food and nutrition security portfolio in CARE covers programs in over 76 countries, where we have about 560 initiatives, which are currently reaching 20.3 million people directly and another 77.5 million indirectly. Of these, 62% are women and girls. Our research has shown that for every $1 we invest in women and food security, we see a $31 return in livelihoods improvement, in resilience, and in empowerment, as well as food and nutrition security. To be able to achieve these outcomes, we have a guiding framework, a unifying framework for all our programming, which is called She Feeds the World. She Feeds the World seeks to recognize the role that women play in food and nutrition security around the world and puts them at the center of all our work in ensuring that they have a range of services for them to be productive in the center. The fact that we focus on women and girls, just to echo the previous speaker's points, means that we engage men and boys and other power holders in the empowerment of women and girls. So what do we do within She Feeds the World? We try to ensure that women have equal access to agricultural inputs like seeds, fertilizer, clean water, and land rights to grow their food. And that they have inclusive markets, that they're connected to more profitable market opportunities and understand how markets work for them to be able to generate income and their livelihoods and buy and sell their food. But once they can buy and sell their food, we ensure that families can make healthy food that supports lifelong nutrition with support from health systems and infrastructure, like access to clean water and sanitation. We also actually really focus on engaging men in household nutrition decision making. COVID has really shown us why we need to continue to provide social protection when things go wrong, like now. That we also have droughts and floods, and more recently we've had a locust outbreak in many countries in Africa. So we ensure that they have enough food, access to inputs, and everything else they need to get through a crisis like this one, but also continue to support them to graduate out of this crisis and graduate out of poverty safety nets. To ensure that we transform agriculture and market systems beyond the communities where we work, we try to work with partners, of course, like FAO, with research partners and advocacy for countrywide policy development. We are clear in this meeting and elsewhere that gender equality can unlock the potential of women farmers who are otherwise overlooked by the system. So the work of CARE and our partners seeks to address inequality right from the household to the communities, to national level and global level, through platforms, through advocacy, through allyship, to elevate the voices of women themselves in decision-making and into leadership. So collectively, we believe it's mission critical and part of women's rights for women to meaningfully participate in all these levels and to have equal access to opportunities and resources to live secure and safe lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, for those excellent remarks and for helping to frame our discussion. I now have the immense pleasure and honor of introducing Senator John Boozman, Arkansas Senior Senator and Dean of the state's Congressional Delegation. In addition to holding very important positions on 4 different committees in the 116th Congress, including Agriculture, Nutrition and Forestry, Appropriations, Environment and Public Works, and Veterans Affairs, Senator Boozman, as we all know, is and has been a steadfast bipartisan leader and champion on issues of agriculture, hunger, as well as food and nutrition security, as co-chair of the Senate Hunger Caucus and in co-sponsoring both the Global Food Security Act and the Global Food Security Reauthorization Act. Senator, thank you for taking time out of your incredibly demanding schedule to join us this morning. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just wanted to take a second and really just thank all of you for the wonderful work that you do. And, you know, a lot of people voice that we need to be doing this and that. You all are actually out there doing it. Government's got the want to, you all have the heart. So again, thank you so, so much for the great work that you're doing. And I'm really pleased to be hearing, you know, the focus on women's empowerment. We were able in Congress, with your all's help, to pass a pretty sweeping bill, the WE Act, which again was all about empowering women. And all of the studies, you know, we talk a lot about using science and this and that, which is so important, using factual data. All of the data says that if you empower women, if you make it such that women do well, then children do well, communities do well, our states and our countries do well. So again, I share the sentiment, you know, exactly. As was mentioned, I'm on a number of committees where we have the opportunity to work both domestically and then also internationally, being part of the Ag Committee, being part of the Appropriations Subcommittee that has to do with international spending on these areas. Lindsey Graham chairs that subcommittee. Senator Leahy is so very active and such a great friend. The good thing about these programs is that they are very bipartisan. You have lots of people from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, working together to get these things done. You all know what a challenging year this has been. We started invariably in March, as I was visiting people that were suffering so greatly. They would always start out, this was the best year that I ever had, you know, the best month. All of a sudden, they went from a 50-year high in our economy to a 75-year low within a month, not only here in the United States, but worldwide, as you all know. And so it's been a great challenge. We've tried to provide aid both domestically and then also internationally, do our best to help ease the burden. And I think we've done a pretty good job in that regard. Congress was able to pass over $3 trillion worth of help. We will be doing a similar bill in the not too distant future. I feel certain either now or right after the first of the year. The good news is, you know, in doing that, in the Senate, we didn't have a dissenting vote. Again, Republicans and Democrats coming together. One thing that we saw that's a real challenge that we have to be so careful with, and it's affecting the United States, affected everybody, is their supply chains, our food supply chains. In the United States there for a while, it looked like literally that was going to break down. The greatest fear that so many, you know, in our country and throughout the world is going into a grocery store and there not being anything in there. And so, again, these things are so very important. Had the opportunity, a dear friend of mine is David Beasley. David, as you all know, is head of the World Food Program, recently received the Nobel Prize for that. He and his organization, they've worked so very hard. He, as you all, you know, are he's very concerned about next year. And in the past, you know, here recently, most of the food insecurity that we've experienced is man-made, you know, to a large extent. You know, it's war, it's this and that, using food as a weapon. We've got all that still going on, and now we've got the COVID virus that you know, has decimated things, ruined economies, and so it's doubled up. And so his message is that those of us that are blessed need to step forward and do additional. I think we in the United States are very proud of the efforts that we've had but we have the ability to do more. And so I know myself and many others, both through government and then also through the just the generosity of the American people, not just America, but the rest of the world that are blessed with additional resources. He's going to be working, we're going to be working very hard to get everybody to step up in a concerted effort, and certainly CARE is right there to help coordinate all of that. So we really do appreciate you. I will help you any way I can. You know, you all are not a bashful group at all, which is good. That's the way you can help us as stuff comes forward. You know, be sure and let us know. But again, we enjoy working with you and just applaud all of the efforts that you've done in making such a very, very difficult situation, helping it move forward. And certainly with the women's empowerment, we will help in any way. I really look forward to visiting with some of you as far as other concrete steps that we can take. What the Women's Empowerment Act did was basically tell USAID, other government agencies, to be aware of the importance of supporting women in various aspects. Take that into account, you know, as you know, through our programs, and try and push things forward. But basic things, you know, having the ability to inherit property, all of those kind of things, which is, you know, we in so much of the world take for granted, and yet in so much of the world also, just basic things like that, education. When you marginalize half of the population, that's a recipe for poverty. So again, like I say, just thank you for all you do, and really look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much, Senator, not only for those words of wisdom and your time, but also for your support to FAO and to CARE, and especially for your critically important leadership in the Senate on these issues. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tom, and we do appreciate you very, very much.
Thank you, Senator. I now have the immense pleasure and honor of introducing Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan, who is the first woman ever to represent Pennsylvania's 6th district in Congress. Although Representative Houlahan only recently joined the Congress, she has wasted no time in making a significant mark, including on the very issues we are here to discuss today. In her first few months in Congress, Representative Houlahan founded the Servicewomen and Women Veterans Congressional Caucus, the first congressional caucus to ever focus on issues facing women both during and following their military service, based upon her own experience in the United States Air Force. She also founded and serves as co-chair of the Women in STEM Caucus to help remove obstacles for the benefit of women and the country. In addition, Congresswoman Houlahan serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and several other key committees. Congresswoman, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely demanding schedule to join us. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the group. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be in the same virtual space as the senator as well. And I'd like to start by thanking the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the CARE for having me here and putting together this very, very important discussion. As mentioned, my name is Chrissy Houlahan. I represent a community that's just outside of Philadelphia. I am a freshman, but not for much longer. So I want to start by saying that whenever we talk about crisis, it's definitely important for us to recognize how crises are impacting specific communities, and particularly as we've been talking about marginalized communities. And as Tom mentioned, I'm an engineer, and I was dismayed to discover that according to a study that was conducted by CARE, analyzing 73 global reports and trying to propose solutions for this hunger crisis, that of those many, many studies, only half made a mention of women or girls. and only 5 of them proposed very concrete actions to resolve the gender inequality systems and issues that are crippling our food systems. So as I mentioned, as an engineer, data matters, and measuring what matters matters. And this is why this revelation is so frustrating. We can't expect us to comprehensively be able to adequately address global crises like COVID-19 if we don't first understand how these kinds of things impact marginalized communities, particularly women and girls, particularly those with disabilities, particularly displaced populations. Ultimately, what any sort of crisis such as COVID will do is further exacerbate inequalities and inequities that already exist previously. So before COVID-19, the UN found that women and girls already are 60% of the population that faces chronic hunger, and that moderate and severe food insecurity are very much higher among females than amongst males. Not to mention that there's pervasive cultural and social norms that dictate that women and girls are usually responsible for providing food, and sometimes and largely expected to eat last and sometimes to eat least. So now here we are in a COVID world and a COVID environment, and we're facing a global pandemic and the ensuing economic fallout, as the senator mentioned, both of which are having a very much disproportionate impact on women and girls. Women around the world are faced with virus control measures that are preventing them from producing or processing food. They are probably more likely to lose their jobs due to the economic effects of the pandemic. And we're talking even in this country about hundreds and thousands of women whose livelihoods and access to food are being threatened, and their ability to fight off COVID as a consequence. So I think that I speak for all of us when I say that all of what we've just been talking about is unacceptable, and that we as leaders must do everything that we can to remedy this situation before it's too late. So I'm enormously grateful by this group to see here that we have both men and women in the audience who are speaking here today, speaking collectively with a common voice that we need to combat this inequity. We need people across the gender spectrum to be united, as I see here, to enact policy and elevate those who are marginalized. In Congress, as Tom mentioned, I haven't been here very long, but this is very much a passion project for me. I'm leading a bipartisan effort that is seeking to increase funding for bilateral nutrition assistance programs, specifically to treat and prevent malnutrition, including reducing the deficit in ready-to-use therapeutic foods, or RUTFs, to treat wasting in children. Additionally, to ensure that there is a comprehensive and response to the RUTF deficit and food shortages globally, we are asking that the U.S. will increase its contributions to multilateral efforts, including the contributions to UNICEF and the World Food Program. I will conclude by saying that years ago, many, many years ago, 70 or so years ago, my father came to this country as a refugee. He escaped the horrors of the Holocaust as a very, very small boy. And one of his most early and vivid memories that he has shared with me is when he was on the ship from Germany over to this fine country, seeing canned peaches for the very first time, and just thinking that they were the most magical food that he had ever seen. He still describes their beauty and the orange circles and spheres that they were. So growing up with him as a dad and growing up in this amazing country, I was taught that the United States has the responsibility and the privilege to lead, to set an example on these kinds of issues such as food scarcity and security, and to offer where we can, because ultimately a more stable and equal world will lead to a more stable and equal United States. So I'm really glad to be joined by so many of you in this effort to combat the pandemic within a pandemic that is global hunger and its very disproportionate impact on women and girls. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope this is the beginning of a long relationship with you all.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for those words of wisdom and hope, for your time, for your support, and of course, for your leadership. We very much look forward to continuing working with you in the next Congress. So thanks again for taking time out of your enormously busy schedule to join us. I now have the pleasure of introducing Susan Kaaria, who is the Senior Gender Officer at FAO, who has over 15 years of experience in conducting action research and developing participatory approaches for catalyzing rural innovation processes and increasing access and benefits from market opportunities by poor rural women and men. Susan will address the linkages for us between gender, nutrition, and food systems. Susan, the floor is yours.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, distinguished panelists, speakers before me, for really setting the space for me to talk about the work that FAO is doing. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, and I hope that it will all work out fine. So distinguished guests, it's my pleasure, and I'm very pleased to be invited here to speak about gender, nutrition, and food systems linkages. I've already been introduced. And what I'm going to do is very quickly talk about the work that, talk a little bit about what we know about some of the inequalities that exist. And then I'll give you a brief overview of some of the things that FAO is doing in this context. I do not even need to repeat this because it's been eloquently discussed by my previous speakers, by the director, FAO liaison officer, has talked about the statistics, women's contribution, the gender gaps that exist. I think what is important to note is that women are producing, they're managing, they're processing, they're traders and they're entrepreneurs. And we also know that if you increase the resources that are controlled by women, if you empower them in society, so improve their status and improve their bargaining power, this affects the decisions that they can make. It also affects the fact that they can invest more in nutrition. So we really all agree on this. However, as several speakers have said, they face substantial constraints in accessing services, markets, employment, assets, etc. The work burden, it hasn't been mentioned, but this is a huge challenge, excessive work burden because of their multiple roles, and also limited decision-making and voice in the households, in organizations, and in institutions. This has already been mentioned. This is the new report that came out in the State of Food Security and Nutrition in 2020. It says there are 690 million people who are hungry, still hungry in the world. Actually, with COVID, these numbers are bound to rise substantially. However, what the report also says very clearly is that women are more food insecure than men. And in every continent, we see that. There are significant differences in Africa and Latin America, but North America and Europe are not exempt. Even there is differences in terms of food insecurity, and also that the gender gap has been increasing. This is what our data is telling us. The second area I want to mention, because I want to mention all the various inequalities, is land. I talk about land because FAO has for many years invested in this area. And so we have statistics around this. And what we have found with all our work is that regardless of the type of indicator we select, women are substantially disadvantaged, whether it's ownership, it's management, it's rights to transfer. And then the other thing I would like to mention is even when women report that they are owners, they are less likely than men to have a legal document showing that, and or have their names on the land ownership. So this is a huge area or huge gap, because land is hugely important in terms of agriculture production, food security, and nutrition. So, and actually I could have had a slide for each of the various inequalities in terms of employment, in terms of access to services, financial. I just selected those. And what I would like to say, and has been highlighted very, very well by the Republican Chrissy, COVID has really undermined all those statistics. So now women are even worse off. So now let me go very quickly and talk a little bit about, so what is FAO doing? What is the Food and Agriculture Organization doing in order to support countries to achieve gender equality and empower women farmers? We have a gender equality policy. Actually, it's just been revised or updated. And it provides very clear guidelines and objectives for the work of the organization. As the director of the Liaison office, Mr. Vimlendra said, gender is a cross-cutting theme, cuts across the entire organization's work. What I'll do now is I'll give you very small snippets of our work at policy level, at the global level, and then I'll give you a few examples of some flagship programs that we are implementing. So we are very cognizant that if we are going to change what's happening, policies have to address gender. Food security and nutrition policies must reform in order to pay attention to rural gender inequalities. So here we've engaged very closely with the Committee on World Food Security, which is the most inclusive international and intergovernmental platform for stakeholders working in food security and nutrition. And here what we've done is for every voluntary guidelines that they develop, we've ensured that there's a gender equality principle. So when countries endorse the guidelines, then they're also endorsing addressing the gender issues. More recently, in 2019, we were together with IFAD and the World Food Programme and the government of Spain, we were able to actually advance an area of work very specific on gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition with the aim of developing voluntary guidelines. This will be very important in terms of providing very concrete policy guidance based on all the lessons that you've heard today, but also with the aim of improving the legal policy framework. And also at a global level, we are also providing the evidence that countries need. Evidence that allows them to understand what is going on, where are the gender gaps in the country. So here we have what we call the country gender assessments. These are, right now we have about 70, but our aim is to have one for each of the 4 member countries. And it's a document that provides information on the situation of women and men. It talks about where the inequalities exist. It talks about where progress has been made, but more importantly, the statistics and also recommendations and guidance on where the entry points are. This is really important information that is produced at country level with governments. Again, to provide broad information for countries, as I said, land for us has been an area where we've invested for many, many years. In 2010, we launched what's called the Gender and Land Rights Database. It has about 90 profiles, country profiles, that for each country it's talking about, it's highlighting what are the political, what are the legal, what are the cultural factors that influence the attainment of women's land rights. It also includes the statistics. It also includes an assessment that looks at to what extent are the legal frameworks in the country conducive for gender equitable land tenure. This information is online and countries can access it and use it. So based on that, we are the custodian agency for two of the SDG indicators on women's land rights, the SDG indicators 5A1 and 5A2. And the 5A1, one of them is the statistics. It's really putting together the numbers that we need. And this information is not existing at the moment. So we are supporting countries and we are developing methodologies. We are strengthening capacities of countries to collect this data and also helping us to report on this data. The second indicator is the legal one that looks at the legal frameworks and looks at the extent to which they guarantee women's land rights. Here we've collected a bit more information. These are the different areas in which the indicator looks at. It looks at titling, it looks at spousal consent, inheritance, the legal framework, quotas. And so this is allowing us to see where we are making progress and where action is needed. We are working a lot around climate change because we recognize this is an important area. I won't say very much, just to say that FAO's corporate climate strategy actually pays attention to gender and actually commits to action. So as an organization, we are supporting countries to mainstream gender in the climate-related planning processes, such as the national adaptation plans, etc. But we are also generating knowledge. We're generating knowledge, tools, methods that we can upscale in terms of climate smart technologies and labor saving technologies, amongst others. So we recognize we can act at the global level, but we must also act at the individual level, strengthen the women, strengthen their access to markets. So here I'm going to share 3 flagship programs that are building on the knowledge that we have. This is a program in the small island development states that's focusing on enhancing women's participation and benefits from value chains. And it builds on the knowledge that we have around, we've developed lots of, we've documented promising practices, what is successful approaches, but also strengthening capacity of the stakeholders who are working in this sector to have the skills. And this is a program that's in 5 countries. We also have another program. One of the things that we've realized very quickly is that alone we cannot achieve the kinds of impacts that we need to. So we have a program called the Joint Program on Accelerating Progress Towards Economic Empowerment of Women, which is implemented by FAO together with IFAD, WFP, and UN Women. It's important to notice that it advocates for multiple entry points. So food security and nutrition, income, participation, but also at the policy level. And we're implementing it in 7 countries. The program is funded by the governments of Norway and Sweden. And we've really gotten some very promising results. Results, of course, as we expect in terms of productivity, nutrition, but also women as leaders, as decision makers, taking over in local governments, and then tackling those social cultural norms and changing gender relations. And of course, recognizing that the policy processes must also continue and creating that enabling environment at the policy level. The last flagship program I'd like to share is, it's a program that FAO has implemented for probably the last 18 years. It's called the Dimitra Clubs. The focus is on access to information in remote rural areas, but also focuses on boosting women's self-confidence, leadership, skills, and also awareness of them being able to discuss their needs and priorities. And the program also uses very nice processes for really discussing sensitive issues around child marriage, unequal workloads, etc. We have about 6,000 Dimitra clubs in 9 countries, but it's implemented now in over 40 field projects of ours. So slowly the programs are beginning to recognize the importance. And I'm going to end the presentation. This is something that was said by one of the participants of the Dimitra clubs in Niger, where she says, before the Dimitra clubs, I wasn't aware of my ability to structure my thoughts and talk. I didn't have the self-confidence to sit with my husband and raise issues that are important to me. Thank you very much. I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Susan, for that very comprehensive overview of FAO's activities in this space. I now have the great pleasure of introducing Melissa Kaplan, who's Senior Policy Advocate for Food Security and Nutrition at CARE. Prior to joining CARE, Melissa served for 5 years as Senior Advocacy Officer with Action Against Hunger. Melissa will tell us about examples of CARE's projects focused on these issues, as well as what the U.S. Congress can do to help support gender equality and women's empowerment in food and agriculture. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Tom. Hello, my name is Melissa Kaplan, and I am the Senior Policy Advocate for Food Security and Nutrition at CARE. I'm very pleased to join you today to speak about the importance of gender and women's empowerment in the food security and nutrition work that CARE is doing around the globe, and to tell you a bit more about our legislative asks related to food security and women. First, let me tell you a little bit about CARE's advocacy programming. In addition to our advocacy with Congress and the administration, CARE also engages members around the country through its Citizen Action Network, or CAN, and it also runs learning tours. Since 2009, CARE's Learning Tours program has taken members and staff of Congress, the administration, journalists, donors, and others on 3 to 4 day intensive trips where they meet the people whose lives are being transformed through US global investments. So far, Learning Tour participants have visited 35 countries. The program currently has over 100 congressional alumni, and 20 bills have been introduced in the House and Senate as a result of a Learning Tour. Before I turn to CARE's advocacy goals around food security and gender, I'd like to share a few examples from CARE's work in the field that illustrate the importance of gender equality and women's empowerment to food security, and show how our programming is adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic while continuing to put women and girls at the center of our response. CARE's food security pandemic response promotes an integrated approach to food and nutrition security, which not only provides access to critical inputs like water, land, seeds, financial services, and markets, but also includes an explicit focus on nutrition, safety nets, and social protection in times of crisis. It works directly with women and youth to strengthen their skills and confidence in sustainable agriculture practices, as well as financial inclusion, market engagement, gender equality, and food and nutrition security. And at the same time, engages with men and boys to support efforts for greater equality. I'd like to share a few specific examples highlighting successful food security projects that have happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, which were shared with CARE by women we work with around the globe. Mohammed Shaban of Palestine reports, with the lockdown affecting people's ability to sell their products and with the lack of food, I launched an initiative with the women of Jalama. It started as an ad hoc WhatsApp group where I offered to exchange extra fertilizer for pesticide for my tomatoes. In no time, women started to follow, offering other inputs and suggesting exchange of produce too. The initiative has created a sense of community. The WhatsApp group has become a source of information, knowledge, and experience. And we provide social support. With the no human-to-human interaction, the group has bonded and become a platform for sharing thoughts and feelings, something that's of huge importance during a crisis. Aishatou Shitu from Niger describes the work of her savings group during the pandemic. We purchased 300 kilograms of rice, 300 kilos of maize, and 200 kilos of millet, using money from our cash box. Each member took home 15 kilos of rice, the same amount of maize, and 10 kilos of millet. That's enough for 3 meals a day for between 20 days and 2 months, depending on the size of the family. We also produced soap and ointment and distributed it among all members. This really helped, especially the group members who were most vulnerable financially. I'm able to help my husband with household finances. In fact, I'm now buying the family's food, especially the rice. Amelia Badalones from the Philippines says that, most importantly, we are able to eat our own produce and we can save for more important needs. Since we have our own crops in our backyard, we still eat 3 times a day. We give our extra supply of vegetables to our neighbors if we know they have limited resources. As these examples illustrate, women around the world play an essential role in ensuring food security, but this role is not always recognized. In August, CARE released a report called Left Out and Left Behind, Ignoring Women Will Prevent Us from Solving the Hunger Crisis. This report focused on the importance of tackling gender inequality in response to the COVID-19 and hunger crises. It discussed how the COVID-19 crisis, food and nutrition security, and gender inequality intersect, and the ways in which women are already leading in the response. The report also found that despite the significant roles women play in food systems, global responses to COVID-19 and related hunger crises were either ignoring women and girls or treating them as victims who have no role in addressing the problems that they face. Despite the many barriers they encounter, women and girls are instrumental to food systems and are already leading the charge to meet COVID-19 related challenges. Addressing gender inequalities will help to deconstruct the barriers these women face, which will boost productivity, promote good nutrition, and lead to better outcomes for women, girls, and their communities. And I think that report is probably dropped in the chat box by now, so I hope everybody will take a chance to take a look at it. I'll also mention that CARE just yesterday released another report entitled, Sometimes We Don't Even Eat. And this is on conflict, COVID-19, and food insecurity. I think both reports should by now be in the chat or shortly will be, so I hope you'll take the time to look at them and learn a little bit more about these issues. So finally, I would like to focus on what the US government and particularly Congress can do to promote food security and the importance of focusing on gender within the food security sector. In follow-up to this morning's discussion, CARE recommends that Congress take the following 4 actions. First, Congress should strongly fund the food security and nutrition accounts within the US budget. In the FY22 appropriations bills for state and foreign operations and agriculture, all of the food security accounts should be funded at the strongest possible levels in order to support US food security programming. These include the Global Food Security Strategy, which funds Feed the Future, also Food for Peace, the McGovern-Dole School Feeding Program, and the Nutrition Subaccount. Congress should provide an investment in these accounts that is no less than FY21 levels, and that recognizes the scale and complexity of the dire challenges facing global food and nutrition security in the wake of COVID-19, and be sure to allocate increased funding accordingly. Second, Congress should ensure that the reauthorization of the Global Food Security Act includes a strong focus on gender. In 2023, Congress will reauthorize the Global Food Security Act. This legislation was mentioned previously, and it is a bill that codified Feed the Future, which is the US flagship food security program, and also coordinates cross-agency work on food security. The reauthorized GFSA should include a strong focus on women, particularly on supporting women smallholder farmers who are critical to global food security, as well as including a gender target of 44% within Feed the Future. Third, any COVID-19 supplemental funding bill passed by Congress should include a minimum of $20 billion for international efforts to address the pandemic, including food security and nutrition. A global pandemic cannot be solved without a US investment in funding the global response. It is essential to include addressing the secondary effects of COVID-19 and the projected resulting rises in global hunger and malnutrition as part of any COVID funding package. Finally, the US must ensure continued robust support and funding for key multilateral organizations, particularly the Food and Agriculture Organization, which we've heard so much about today. As we've heard, FAO plays the lead role in coordinating global efforts to improve global food security and nutrition, and in promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. FAO has 75 years of experience, which demonstrate that with the right support and investments, women farmers and leaders can play a major role in achieving global food security and poverty-reducing development. FAO is a particularly effective vehicle for channeling US investments in improved agricultural development, as well as global food and nutrition security, and the US should fund it accordingly. Thank you very much for participating in today's webinar and for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you all, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa. As we transition to the question and answer segment of our event, I would first like to give USAID, which plays a key leadership role in this space and which is an important strategic partner of both FAO and CARES, to briefly take the floor. More specifically, I would like to invite Maura Barry, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, to briefly tell us about USAID's critically important work and leadership role in advancing this agenda. Without further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you to Senator Boozman and Congresswoman Houlahan for their leadership on this very important issue of women's empowerment and food security and nutrition. I also want to recognize FAO and CARE for supporting this event and their contributions to ending hunger and malnutrition. And especially I want to thank our speakers today, Vimlendra, Maureen, Melissa, and Susan, to thank them, and also our many other partners and all of you who are participating in this event today for the work that you do to make sure that gender equality and women's empowerment remain at the forefront of our global agenda. In particular, I really want to express USAID's support for the development of the voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's empowerment that are being developed by the Committee for World Food Security, and we really look forward to continuing to engage on this effort. Boosting women's empowerment is one of our highest priorities in the US Feed the Future initiative. Because you know what, simply put, women are key to our ultimate goal of ending poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. When women have the tools to succeed, they reinvest in their families and communities, creating a multiplier effect that promotes global prosperity and stability. And that's why we're focused on helping women unlock their full potential. And we do this by focusing on a few core priorities. For one, we continue to focus on narrowing the persistent gender gap we see in the adoption of agricultural technologies and practices. We do this through research and extension and advisory services that integrate gender needs and priorities, and by addressing the constraints to accessing credit and assets that women face. Also critical is bridging the financing gap faced by the large and growing number of women entrepreneurs. Accessing finance, we know it's essential for them to be able to grow and sustain their businesses. And then finally, it's important that we collectively address gender norms and gender-based discrimination that prevent women from having a voice in market institutions and governance bodies. It's only when women are fully able to participate in and benefit from improved food systems where safe and nutritious foods are broadly available and accessible, we will see systemic and sustainable change at scale. And this kind of long-term structural change also requires the kind of multi-sectoral collaborative approach that we embrace at USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. By looking holistically across food security, nutrition, and water security, each critical for eradicating poverty and hunger, we're transforming food systems to make them more inclusive and resilient against shocks and stresses. And evidence shows that women's empowerment has a positive effect on household resilience. And this point on resilience feels especially poignant now as COVID-19 continues to expose vulnerabilities in food systems. As Congresswoman Houlahan had said earlier, a pandemic within a pandemic. So we know that groups that were already vulnerable are facing an outsized risk during this very difficult time. And so that's why I'd like to once again extend my appreciation and support for making sure that gender equality is front and center in the global development agenda. And thank you all for allowing me to say a few words. Back over to you, Tom.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those excellent remarks. We're running short of time, and what I would like to do, given the amount of time that remains, is to ask our last three speakers to share with us a key takeaway message that each might have for us. If there was one thing they would like each of us to remember from their remarks today, what that would be in 30 seconds or less, starting with Susan, then turning to Melissa, and then lastly with Maura. Susan, over to you.
Thank you very much. My key message is you cannot act on only one issue. Women face intersecting disadvantages. So we must have an integrated approach, acting at the individual, at the institutions, and at the policy level, and making sure that we tackle the social cultural norms that perpetuate inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Melissa, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. I would say that my overarching message or takeaway is that women are already doing extraordinary work to improve food security for themselves, for their communities, for their families around the world. And really, I think our job is just to sort of help them out as much as we can, and particularly looking to the US government and to Congress and to the administration, just any way that we can support these women in the work they're doing, whether that's making sure programming is funded, whether that's making sure the COVID response includes a good international component, whether that's just making sure that future legislation like GFSA supports women farmers and other women as much as it possibly can. I think that's our role. That's really what we should sort of take away from this. The women are doing amazing work, and we should just be there to support them and back them up.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And last but not least, Maura.
Thank you, Tom. Women are the cornerstone of all development. So having this event today and elevating the discussion, especially, women's role in food security, it's so important. And having this ability to have a layered and multi-sectoral coordinated approach to addressing hunger and malnutrition and ensuring that women are given the tools to lead, because they're the ones that are leading in fighting this pandemic of hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. So that would be a good takeaway.
Outstanding.
And just a thank you for including USAID and for leading, for FAO and CARE for leading and elevating such an important issue.
No, thanks to you for making time to join us and for your leadership role and USAID's in this important work. So in closing, I hope that all of you have enjoyed this program as much as I have. I think we've covered a great deal of territory and learned quite a lot in just 1 hour. In particular, I think we learned from Senator Boozman about the importance of women's empowerment in terms of US policy objectives, especially global food security, international development, and he accentuated the critical importance of bipartisanship in taking forward this agenda. And he reminded us of the centrality of women by stating that if women do well, then children do well, and families do well, states do well, and communities do well. We then heard from Congresswoman Houlahan about the disproportionate impact of crises such as COVID-19 on women and girls in particular, and she emphasized the need to elevate and empower those who are marginalized, especially women and girls. From Susan, we heard about FAO's work and priorities in relation to gender and promoting women's empowerment and how gender cuts across all of FAO's work, including FAO's flagship programs. And Susan highlighted the importance of having policies and legal frameworks and evidence to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. From Melissa Kaplan of CARE, we heard about CARE's projects and learning tours focused on these important issues, as well as what the US Congress can do to support gender equality and women's empowerment in food security and agriculture. This included 4 recommended actions for Congress, including strongly funding food security and nutrition accounts, ensuring the reauthorization of the Global Food Security Act has a strong focus on gender and women, especially women smallholders, and that any COVID supplemental bill include funds for food security and nutrition, and that the US must ensure continued funding for key multilateral organizations. And again, last but not least, we heard from Maura Barry of USAID about concrete examples of what USAID is doing to narrow the gender gaps that exist across the world, as well as the financing gaps that exist for women entrepreneurs, and the need to address gender discrimination and enable women to fully benefit from and participate in economic activities, as well as the need to holistically look across food security and nutrition and water security to promote women's empowerment. So on behalf of FAO North America and CARE, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today and for your great participation in this discussion. I apologize that we did not have enough time to get to your questions, but I assure you that the questions will be shared with all of our speakers who can follow up with you after this event. I would also like to, of course, thank our outstanding cast of speakers and give special thanks to my FAO colleague Florian Dorr and Melissa Kaplan of CARE for all of their great work in helping to organize today's virtual congressional briefing. Please be on the lookout for additional events that we at FAO North America will be organizing throughout the remainder of 2020 and beyond. Until then, and in the meantime, stay safe and stay tuned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.